There are two good resources to use when exploring and using the AF SDK. One of them is a help file provided via a download, and the other is in fact PySystem Explorer. PySystem Explorer, of course, is the really graphical environment for building and administering PyAsset framework, but its design is very closely coupled to how the AF SDK works underneath. If we look in System Explorer, first of all, we can select an AF database. So we see that any given AF server has these virtual databases within it. Okay, so we pick a database, and within that database there's a collection of elements and a whole library of other things. There's element templates, event frame templates, tables, enumeration sets, and so on. And in fact, if you were with us when we built the tank farm example here, we've worked with a lot of these types of objects. We saw that really there's an object representing an element, and that element has not only a collection of children, perhaps. If we look at the tank farm, it has children, and elements also have collections of AF attributes. Attributes, in turn, have other properties, right? They also have a name and description, and data can come from a data reference plugin, which in turn can be configured. In fact, all of these things are objects exposed in the AF SDK. So if we look at the documentation for the AF SDK, we'll look first at this asset hierarchy. Of course, the world kind of begins with the AF database within a AF server. The database has elements and various templates. If we look at this AF element, it in fact contains a whole list of things that we can do to those elements and properties that we really recognize right from PySystem Explorer. In PySystem Explorer, every element has some identification information, and then all these collections. And that's here in this help file. The name, if it has a parent, all sorts of stuff that we recognize directly from PySystem Explorer. In fact, I really use these two resources in tandem when I work with the AF SDK. AF SDK reference here can be very good for detailed information on how to make calls programmatically, but really to keep the relationships straight in my head, PySystem Explorer can be the good reality check and grounding for doing that. Now to download this AF SDK reference, it is available on vCampus in the Download Center. There's a PyAF Developer Tools download. Really, that just contains the SDK reference here, which has all of our documentation. Now you'll notice some things in these hierarchies. For example, if we look at the PySystem hierarchy, you'll see some things like the modeling namespace. And if we dig deeper into, for example, an element, we see things that we don't recognize from System Explorer, or at least things that we haven't used yet, like AF layers and AF ports. Well, a lot of this stuff, in fact, is not used in the OSIsoft client tools. The history of PyAsset Framework is really as the underpinnings of a specific application called Sigmafine. In fact, this application still exists and is made by a partner of OSIsoft. But a lot of things in the AF SDK are there specifically to support this product that we once owned. So can you use these things like AF ports and models and layers and everything? Theoretically, yes, but none of our client tools really work with them. So our best recommendation for practical reasons is that you consider them to be vestigial things specifically there to support the Sigma-Fine application and not for general use. The things that really are there for general use, like, of course, elements and event frames and attributes and plugins and everything, all of those are fully supported by our client tools and are what we really intend to be the PyAsset framework experience. We will get started with our AF applet project by creating a new project in Visual Studio, setting it to compile against the full version of the .NET 4 framework, and then adding the reference to the right version of the AF SDK. So we'll begin by making a new project, and this will code in Windows Forms. I'll write my code here in C#, but you are welcome to go with Visual Basic. I'll call it AF applet and say OK. Now when we create a Windows Forms application specifically, it gets set to compile against the client profile, like a reduced subset of the .NET framework, and we need to fix that. The AF SDK will want the full version of the .NET framework, so if we look at the project properties, we're able to set that. Now if you're doing this in Visual Basic or another .NET language, the location of this target framework dropdown might be a little different. But here, we can just say, use the full version of .NET Framework 4. As of AF SDK 2.5, all of the new features in AF are part of an assembly targeting .NET Framework 4. If we look in the AF product directory, we see a 4.0 folder and some new assemblies that are compiled against .NET 4. Versions of the AF SDK prior to 2.5 compiled against the .NET Framework 3.5. And for backwards compatibility, we've included those older versions. Now, they don't have the shiny new features of AF SDK 2.5 and greater, but they're there if you need to use them if your application can't be migrated quite yet to .NET 4. But today, we will want to see those new features, so we'll end up using the .NET 4 assemblies. So back in Visual Studio, we'll continue by adding those references to our project. Get the form open here, and add references. Now when we open the Add References dialog, it loads in the background, so we'll give it just a second. When it finishes loading, we can sort this thing by name, and start typing OSI to take us down to the OSIsoft section. Now that's interesting. I see a couple of assemblies here that look to be duplicated. Well, yeah. There's the newer version targeting the .NET Framework 4 and the older version. So two assemblies that we'll want right now are the main AF SDK assembly and also an AF user interface assembly, which contains certain user controls that we'll want to use today. So I'll grab both of those, making sure I have the 4.0 version. And now we will be ready to proceed by looking at some of those controls and things that we can do with them. For our applet, we will want users to graphically connect to a Pi system, to select a database, and then have a tree view of the elements in that database. So rather than coding up all of those controls ourselves, we can use the AF user interface library, which has some common controls in it. Now, many of the things that we see in System Explorer are exposed in this AF user interface library. Not all of them are documented. Some are really intended more for internal use by OSIsoft, but they're all available. Really, the ones that we think customers are most likely to use will have documentation. So in our case, we want to bring a few of these controls onto the applet. So in the toolbox of Visual Studio, we'll add those in. In the toolbox, we can right-click down in the bottom and choose some items. Now, three of these items that we want are, we can filter for them, is the Pi System Picker, which will allow us to pick a Pi system and connect to it. We want the AF database picker, which will allow us to choose an AF database. And then once that database is chosen, show some elements from it in an AF tree view. This will make our life easier. So I've got those 3 items selected. Now they should show up in my toolbox for general use. Okay, so we'll drag those onto the form. There's a system picker, there's a database picker, and a tree view. Now in this system picker and in the database picker, there are a lot of icons that I really am not interested in my specific use here. Now there's navigation if people are trying to navigate a list of these servers, and then perhaps if they want to add or remove a server from the known servers table, there are icons for that too. Well, we can hide those. There are properties here for these guys. For example, if I want to hide all of the combo box navigation buttons, like I don't want those. A combo box is fine. And I don't want users in my client tool here. I'm going to assume that I just want to offer some really basic options here. Just the connect button and the combo box. So just about everything else I'm going to hide. There we go. And I can do the same thing to my AF database picker in just a minute. There's one more property on this connect dialog that could be interesting. It's the connect automatically property. So in other words, when my control loads, it will try to connect to whatever the default Pi system is. We'll set that to true for now. Okay, so I'll finish up here by adding, or by hiding, a few of the buttons that I really don't want on the database picker either. About all I want is the combo box, and that should be good enough. So my controls are there, and they're ready to go. The next thing we will do is look at connecting these so that they work together.